Hi, folks, and welcome to the 18th episode of the Vitor Vicente podcast. Today, I have the great pleasure of talking to the Canadian author, coach, and podcaster Zachary Stockill. Zach's work on the domain of emotional management, in particular retroactive jealousy, has helped in more than 10 years a massive number of people all over the world. And I'm one of them. And perhaps you could also benefit from hearing from him, or know someone who might need that improvement. So stick with us to know Zach and what he has to say about his experience on helping men and women putting their lives together. It would be great if you could subscribe to my channel and also press the like button below as a gesture of gratitude. So I see you in a sec. Hi, Zach. Welcome to my podcast.
Thanks for the invitation, Vitor.
I'm extremely happy to have you in my show. First, because we can talk verbally. Second, to thank you for all the advice I received from your content. I think it was so helpful. Like I even like words to say how much my life is smoother, with harmony. An harmony I never experienced, but probably I will jump into that as we speak. So I just want to start with a thank you, and probably want to end with a thank you, and um, I want to say something for the public out there. So you are known mostly about the retroactive jealousy, which is like I say the main aspect of your work, but it's much wider than that. But before we deep dive in your stuff, I would like you, if you don't mind, just to unpack what is retroactive jealousy, because I believe that there is a lot of people suffering from that, but they don't know what it is. And if they know, or at least if they can name it, I think it's already a good starting point for them to improve. So if you don't mind, just unpack what is retroactive jealousy, and also how did you get into it?
Sure. Yeah. And as I mentioned to you a moment ago, before we started recording, I'm really glad that you found my stuff helpful. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. It's always nice to hear. Basically, the term retroactive jealousy refers to unwanted intrusive thoughts, often obsessive curiosity, and or what I like to call mental movies about your partner's past relationships and or sexual/dating history. So, sometimes people compare it to obsessive compulsive disorder. At the very least, many experiences of retroactive jealousy has a lot in common with a lot of experiences of OCD. But basically, it's people who can't stop thinking about their partner's past, at least some of the time. Sometimes it's related to what I call genuine clashes in values. In other words, sometimes, someone's past could indicate that there are some genuine red flags there. There could be some genuine incompatibilities. But more frequently, at least with the people that I work with one-on-one, it's more or less irrational. There's no serious concern about your partner's values. There's no serious red flags. It's more or less this extremely torturous, painful, annoying condition where you can't stop thinking about your partner's past, picturing them in bed with past lovers, wondering about exactly what they did and where they went with their past lovers, all this kind of thing. For people who have never experienced it, it might sound quite odd, but there are hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of us, if the traffic to my website is any indication. So it's more popular, it's more common, shall we say, than you might imagine. And I got into this bizarre line of work. I struggled with this myself in my personal life when I was a much younger man. And, this is well over 10 years ago. And the internet at that time, I mean, there was basically nothing on this topic. I mean, I own the domain retroactivejealousy.com, not because I'm some millionaire, but because I registered it a million years ago because no one else had it. It was really not much information at all. I struggled with this for years in my first serious relationship. It was absolute hell. I did everything I could to try to work my way through it. I went to seminars, I read endless books, I talked to therapists, I had all kinds of different experiences. And when I finally made a progress on that, I published a very short book under a pen name because I didn't think this was going to become my life. I just kind of wanted to put something out on this topic. The book is called Overcoming Retroactive Jealousy, and that was back in 2013. I launched the blog at the same time. And yeah, I mean, I have other projects as well, but this is been a constant in my life for over 10 years, is helping people work through this issue.
Hmm. So I would say we're far from imagining that a bit more than 10 years ago, you would become the retroactive JavaScript guy on the internet. Like, I think was nowhere in your head. I think
No.
you were trying to find a way to solve your own problems, and then you thought you could help others. How do
Yeah.
how do you see, like, after 10 years that you you got into this role?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, I think it makes sense, when I look back on it, because I think I mentioned I'm at my parents' house right now, my childhood home. And I remember growing up just being surrounded by books on psychology, self-help, personal development. So when I really think about it, I've always had an interest. I've always been surrounded by people who are interested in bettering themselves and self-help and psychology and all the rest. My mother was a social worker, so obviously
Mm.
she would read a lot of psychology. But actually in university, I studied for 7 years. I have 2 master's degrees in history. Basically, my plan was to become a history professor. But at the same time, I got very interested. This is back when I was in university. I was very interested in men's work. I was in a men's group for a while, and
Mm.
I would kind of found myself, counseling friends going through difficult relationships and things like that. I'd always been very interested in that. I always felt moved to help people in one way or another. So, in some ways, it's strange looking back and thinking that I ended up as the retroactive jealousy guy. But at the same time, it kind of makes sense if you look at my entire history dating back to my childhood.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point, for the people that are listening to it, there's already at least a handful of them thinking, maybe I'm one of them. I never thought about it,
Mm,
but I can relate to this problem, because it's not something that, let's say, you would realize right away, but it might ring a bell. So I know you have a whole course and the program available for people, which is extremely helpful. You have plenty of testimonials of individuals saying, men and women both, saying they changed their lives radically after going through that. But if you don't mind, just tell, like, in a nutshell, what people can do about it. I know you have videos about it. You just tell, like, I don't know, 3-5 steps that are major, like in terms of actions,
sure.
ideas.
Sure. Yeah. And just to be absolutely clear, I mean, if you go to my YouTube channel, there's literally hundreds of free videos. So if you don't want to, support my work financially, that's totally fine. There's all kinds of stuff available. But in terms of actionable steps, I think, I mean, God, where to begin? Number one, I think one of the most important skills that anyone can learn who's dealing with retroactive jealousy is to separate your emotional response to the thought from the thought itself. Realize that when you have an intrusive thought, or when you have a thought that causes any sort of emotional response in you, there's actually two processes going on. We almost imagine it as being one and the same, where we get a painful thought and the thought is painful, and it's almost like a package. But it's not. There's the thought that pops into our head, and then there's our reaction to the thought. As I often say, we can't always do a lot about the thought popping into our head, but we can do a lot about learning to manage and control our emotional response to the thought. And this is where the gold is. This is where the miracles truly start to happen. Because once we start getting a handle on managing our emotional response to the thought, if we build up that habit over and over and over again of managing our emotional response to the thought, eventually our brain's going to get the hint that, what, we don't need to be thinking about this all the time.
Mm.
Our fight or flight impulse isn't necessary. There's no serious problem here. And eventually those thoughts will start to fade. That begs the question, how on earth do we manage our emotional response to the thought? And I think that a lot of it can start with the breath, learning how to manage our breath and learning how to gauge and manage our physical response to these thoughts. Because as we all know, body and mind are connected, right?
Mm.
We often want to tackle mental problems all in our head, but if we start getting into our body more and learning to manage our physical response to thoughts, that can impact our mentality as well. So as I say, it starts with the breath. So you get an intrusive thought, starts causing all these emotional responses in us. Number one, ask yourself, am I breathing right now? Because 99 times out of 100, when someone's going through one of these episodes, they might not be conscious of it, but their breath starts to get very, very shallow. They're not breathing really deeply into their lungs. It's almost up around their sternum, very short and shallow. And when we do this, it compounds everything. It sends a panic response to our brain. So that's going to feed the intrusive thought even more. It's going to feed panic. It's going to cause our fight or flight instinct to kick in. So if we can learn in those moments just to take a few deep breaths, it's the oldest advice in the world, right? Everyone gives us, oh, just take a few deep breaths and relax. But it's a cliche, it's cliched advice for a reason. It really does help. It really does work. So number one, make sure you're breathing. Number two, you can ask yourself, what's my body doing right now? So one of the ways you can do this is you can almost pretend like you're outside of yourself looking at yourself. So most people, when they're going through an experience of retroactive jealousy or intrusive thoughts, there's some kind of tension on their body. So for me, my shoulders used to get kind of tense, and I would almost be squinting a little bit. It took me a while to realize this, but this part of my face would almost get a little bit tight. So again, we're interested in breaking patterns. Just take a minute to shift your physicality a little bit. It sounds silly. It sounds like, well, I'm dealing with this thing, this problem with my partner's past. Why is he talking about, moving your body and breathing and all this stuff? It's because these are very easy, simple, practical, non-intellectual ways to start to change some of these patterns that have often built up in our body over many, many years. So that's two things to start doing. I could talk about a lot more. We could talk about meditation practices. We could talk about mindfulness practices. And also, depending on someone's experience of retroactive jealousy, I think it's very useful to start getting a handle on how much of this problem is truly irrational versus how much of this problem is actually rational. And that's where talking to a good therapist or a coach or someone like me, that can be very useful in talking through your feelings and trying to get a better handle on whether there's actually a problem with your partner's past or whether it's simply you can't stop thinking about it.
Mm. It's interesting that some of the advice you gave, it's physical, and it's not what people would expect. And I truly believe that we can solve some of our mental issues or psychological drama just by taking action, just by doing something, just by being active, just by accomplishing something domestic. I think it was you. One of your videos you were saying, well, if there is nothing useful to do, just do the dishes and you'll feel much better afterwards. There is this reward, and the reward is full of positive emotion, and at least for, let's say, half an hour, 1 hour, your life will be much better, and you probably will forget about all those mental movies. So it seems that the physical stuff is crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So back in 2014, I started a secret Facebook group for students who take my online course, Get Over Your Partner's Past Fast. And people come and go, depending on, some people just want to move on from this topic completely. I completely understand that. But I think right now we're pushing 600 people, and a lot of people have been in there for many years. It's great. But anyway, sorry, this is composed exclusively of either past or current retroactive jealousy sufferers. And at least, once a month, someone will start talking about exercise, and oh my God, I just started this simple exercise routine based on Zach's, advice, and this has made such a difference in my overall life. And again, it's not original advice. It's not groundbreaking advice. We all know that physical exercise is good, but you're absolutely right. I think people often underappreciate how impactful it can be to make changes to our body or to do something physical or whatever when we're dealing with mental problems. So you're absolutely right. It's so important.
Yeah, I actually have a guest here who is a personal trainer. He owns his own gym company or fitness company. They don't have gyms; they just look after a few gyms for clients. And he said one sentence. I think it's not his. I think it's probably an Irish sentence. I don't know, or some English speaking sentence. They say, I don't want to get it wrong. I think it was "motion is lotion," and that's absolutely true.
Yeah,
absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah. See, I have a dirty mind, so my mind goes somewhere different. But no, it's good. I like it. Yeah. It's good. I like it.
Well, it can be motion with someone. It doesn't need to be
exactly.
on your own.
Shared motion, absolutely.
Shared motion. Yeah. So it seems that some of these issues are related to OCD or some sort of obsession or compulsive behavior.
Certainly can be, yeah. Not all the time, but it certainly can be.
So in this case, maybe it's a bit more complex because it's probably like a person's condition, it's or the way they were brought up. So, is there a distinction between those who were built to this pattern, or they end up like this because, I don't know, they met the wrong person? Do you see different paths, or how do you see the whole universe of retroactive jealousy sufferers?
Yeah, I would say there's no one type of retroactive jealousy sufferer. There are some commonalities, some patterns, which I'll discuss in a moment, but there isn't just one type. When I was struggling with this myself, I thought, well, this is probably just a guy thing. male ego, whatever. Like, it's probably just guys who deal with this. And that's absolutely not true at all. I mean, I have many, many women clients. I would estimate that the majority of people who find me are still men, but it's a slight majority. It's not an overwhelming majority. There's all kinds of women who struggle with this. Gay men, lesbians, transgender, I mean, you name it. Any kind of person can struggle with this. I don't think there's one common cause. There are sometimes potential causes, like for example, this wasn't true of me, but sometimes people who grew up in particularly conservative environments with really conservative ideas about women or men and sex and dating, I think sometimes those people perhaps are more prone to struggle with retroactive jealousy. But again, speaking about my own experience, I didn't grow up in an environment like that, and my symptoms were the exact same. So it's tough to say. I would say that the majority of retroactive jealousy sufferers are probably introverts, and the majority are probably overthinkers as well. Not an overwhelming majority, but likely a majority, if I had to say. And scientists and researchers, if we're talking about OCD, they're relatively divided on what actually causes OCD. They think that there could be some genetic components to that, but there isn't like one cause that we can all point to and say that's what causes this problem. And as I alluded to a moment ago, sometimes if you meet the wrong person and there are glaring red flags, I mean, I hate to sound harsh, but you catch my drift. I mean, if you're dating a woman and she's cheated on 3 of her past 4 boyfriends, that's going to raise some alarm bells. And you know what? Perhaps you should be paying attention to those alarm bells. Now, I say that and sometimes people get upset. I'm in the business of helping people to facilitate personal change. I know better than anyone that people can and do change, but not always. And the person has to want to change and all that. So, sometimes if you are an introverted overthinker, and if you haven't had a ton of relationship experience, you meet someone who's got a rather colorful past, and maybe you don't share the same values, obviously that can inspire retroactive jealousy as well. But that's a very long-winded way of saying it's very complicated, and there isn't really 1 or 2 causes that you could look to that we all have in common here.
Yeah, so you just refer that most of the people that approach you are men, or let's say the majority.
A slight majority, I would say.
Slight majority, yeah. So I would tend to think, but I mean, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, that I believe it's not only the topic, it's the fact that we guys, we sometimes lack another mate to talk about those things. So there's some taboos. I was even talking to my girlfriend yesterday because we met a few of my friends were in the pub drinking, eating, and we were just talking social topics, politics and current affairs and all that. And I believe, and she was a bit, she was not bored, but it wasn't exactly her environment, which I believe that women are more into people and gossip. And I don't know, I'm going to upset some people with this comment, but it's not necessarily superficial, but it's more about people's lives and what happens on a day-to-day basis, whether men tend to talk about topics like what's happening in society, even about football, Formula 1, sport, not necessarily what's happening with them. And then I think it opens a gap for your own struggles. And sometimes most men don't have someone to share what's going on. And I believe that some of them would approach you with that intention.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I see this all the time, and honestly, it breaks my heart. I mean, so many men lack real friends. For whatever reason, it seems to me, and I'm going to generalize, and people can call me a misogynist and cancel Zach and all that. That's fine. But women seem to be better at maintaining their friendships when they have long-term relationships or when they're married, where I think a lot of men kind of let those relationships fall by the wayside to some extent. A lot of men, so many men, lack real friends. I mean, I've been on coaching calls and a client will tell me something relatively banal. I'm not saying it's uninteresting, but not something particularly noteworthy or whatever. And he'll say, I've never told anyone that. I've never told another man that or whatever. And it's, I would take it for granted, but for him, it's a big deal because he doesn't have anyone to talk to other than his girlfriend, other than his wife. And this is, I mean, I feel strongly about this issue because, I mean, I've talked about this a lot, but this is the big mistake that I made as a much younger man in my first serious relationship, where I met an incredible woman. I thought, this is it. She's into music and she's into all the things that I'm into. And like, I don't need my other friends. I'm just going to move in with her and we're going to go full throttle. And that's it. This is my person. And I really regret that because I think men need other men. We need other guys to connect with. We need other male voices for perspective. Women can give us different things, and women can often give us very rational, great perspectives as well. I'm not discounting that, but men need other men, just the same way I think women need other women. Right? It's a different dynamic. It brings
Yeah.
different things to the table. So you're absolutely right. It's so important. And you mentioned you're in Ireland, which is UK adjacent. I know it's not the United Kingdom. It's funny. I'd be curious for your thoughts on this, but I found in making friends with Brits, for example,
Hmm.
British men, the culture of taking the piss, and it's just there's so much like and I love teasing, and I don't take myself too seriously, and that's all good. But it often feels like they only really want to open up and like let's talk about some real issues after we've had 3 or 4 pints, and
Yeah.
for me it's
Mhm.
like, well, why can't we just start with that?
Mhm.
That's more interesting. I mean, you mentioned women talking about what I would call a lot more interesting topics. I've always loved having women friends, and if I'm at a party, my girlfriend makes fun of me because eventually I'll end up talking to the women, and it's not because I'm trying to be Mr. Suave and pick anyone
And
up. It's
she's
because
not
the
jealous.
conversations. No, well, no, she's fine because she knows me. It's because often the conversations are more interesting.
Hmm.
I mean, but what do you think about that? Like that culture of men where it's I find it's tough to find men to really connect with who want to talk about real things.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you, especially in group. Like you can forget about it.
Mm,
If there
yeah,
are more than three, let's say up to three friends, maybe you can talk about what's going on with you.
that's a really good point.
But after three, I'm talking about three people, not 3 beers. Huh? After 3 beers, even it's impossible. But
Yeah,
more than three guys, it's not going to happen. I just give up. That's why sometimes I like to talk, I like to meet friends that don't have the habit of bringing others. Because let's say I'm meeting
yeah.
friend X with the objective of talking about Z, and then they come up, oh, John and Jack are coming, and I'm like, oh, then I won't be able to share the things I wanted. So I think, but most of my friends are not like that because they know that we meet for a purpose, so we are there for a specific conversation. They know that things are going on, but it happens. It happened more when I was younger. As you grow up, people are more adults, or they should be, and they know your patterns, they know your interests. But in the past, I remember being very frustrated because I wanted to meet with that specific guy because I know we're gonna have that specific fun, and then two other tag along, and it's a totally different night out. So I had a really hard time with that, and I had very serious issues to hang out with men because I only had a sister, and all my cousins are female. So for me,
Mm,
like going out with guys was always strange. It took me maybe, I don't know, maybe until my early 20s to be okay with it. Not to be fine, just to be okay with it, which is quite late. Like you should be able to
mm,
hang out with mates, let's say, at least by the time you go to university, age of 18.
yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, for any guys watching this, especially younger men, I would say, don't make the mistake I made. Make sure to keep investing in those male friendships. I mean, I've come a long way in that. I mean, I learned that lesson, early on, and I'm grateful for that. But keep investing in those male friendships. And again, in my view, it's hard to find good, solid male friends who are interested in personal development and all this stuff. So if you find guys like that, if you find a little community, keep investing in that, regardless of your relationship status, because you're right, it's very important for sure.
Yeah. And I think another mistake that men do, and Jordan Peterson was saying that the other day, that especially when they are young, is putting their girlfriends in the pedestal.
Oh
That's
yes,
a
tear down the
that's a
pedestal.
Yeah, that's a huge mistake. It's a huge
Yes.
mistake for you, a huge mistake for her, because she might enjoy being on the pedestal for, I don't know, for a weekend. I mean, everyone enjoys it. I enjoy it as well. But
Yeah.
for the whole time, I think it will just ruin the relationship.
Nope. Yeah, that's another, and I talk about this a lot too in the context of overcoming retroactive jealousy. If you're putting your partner up on a pedestal, they have no choice but to look down on you. Ultimately, they don't want to be up there, woman or man, because often when guys put a woman up on a pedestal, there's all kinds of unspoken nastiness around that. They
Mm,
might be feeling resentful because, well, I thought you were this angel, and how dare you date that,
mm,
idiot 4 years ago? Like, well, you're not this angel, and you know, there's often quite a bit of nastiness associated with that. And like, I mean, I don't think any quality woman wants to date a kiss ass, a woman,
Yeah,
a guy who just worships her. It's like women are human beings. They're people. They're entitled to their mistakes and their flaws and their triumphs and everything in between, just like the rest of us. And again, just I think about that line all the time. When you put someone on a pedestal, they have no choice but to look down on you. So it's toxic for the relationship. It's toxic for attraction over the long term. And eventually she's going to think, well, this guy, he's idolizing me. Like I'm bored. I mean, like this is
yeah.
getting to be a bit much. And I know that I'm going to disappoint him sooner or later. And he's going to be extremely distraught and he's going to be angry and all the rest.
Mhm.
Like women can sense in a deep level that, you know, there's that's not going to lead to good things sooner or later. I mean,
Yeah.
talking about putting women on a pedestal, I don't know if you like on social media sometimes you'll see these, these they call them thirst traps, right? These beautiful women, and the comments section just filled with guys, just all
Yeah.
kinds of insane, lavish praise. And I'm
Mhm.
so fascinated about what's going on there, like what the mentality is. Like, Cletus in Alabama, who's posting on Alex's Instagram page, who's this Brazilian bikini model. Like, does she
Mm.
think that she's going to see that comment and just be
Yeah.
like, well, I got to get to Alabama. He just called me beautiful. Like, what's the mentality there? So yeah, guys, just stop doing that. It's horrible for your dating life, and women don't like it ultimately.
No, that's the worst thing. If they check your Instagram profile and I don't know, half of the people you are following are bikini
Yeah,
models, you can be sure that out of 20 women, 19 will give up on you right away. They are not even
yeah.
having a glass of wine or going for a walk with you. They just say, sorry, I just met someone else and I'm not interested anymore. So
And I
don't
would
do it.
say if you're posting thirsty comments on those bikini models' profiles, then 20 out of 20 quality women will walk away and not give you the time of day because, yeah, I don't understand the guys who are doing this. It's just, yeah, I don't get it.
Yeah, yeah, it's pathetic. Yeah. Um, you also have a book about breakup. I don't remember now the
Yeah,
title of the book. Sorry, I'm very bad with titles, with names and all that. I have a
the
book about
breakup
how did you.
recovery blueprint.
Okay, I'm going to put all the stuff then in the description for people to have a look and perhaps purchase it. So how did you get from retroactive jealousy to breakup?
Well, take a guess. I mean, I experienced in my 20s a few breakups, serious breakups. And ultimately, they were all really good things. I mean, those relationships had to end. But as anyone who's ever been through a breakup knows, I mean, they're not easy. Um, they challenge us, they push us. And I think that I got very interested in what people call breakup recovery. I mean, how do you work your way through that? How can you
Mm.
internalize all the lessons from that relationship, and how can you move on in a productive way that's going to serve you well moving forward. So again, I read it, similar to the retroactive jealousy stuff. I talked to all kinds of therapists and counselors, just getting their perspective. Um, I mean, I like you, I hosted a podcast for a while where I interviewed experts, so I did that, and I boiled down a lot of the lessons from my personal life into how to move on from a breakup and how to get through that as quickly as possible, while not denying your feelings and internalizing and embracing those lessons that relationship taught you. And it's very interesting. I mean, if you look into breakup advice on a place like YouTube or whatever, it's so cynical because I think so much of it, particularly targeted at men, it's not about getting over the breakup. It's get your ex back, right?
Yeah.
It's a very, very popular topic. This is how you get your ex back. And I just think that's so cynical because the American comedian Louis C.K. has this great line about breakups and divorces. He says, anytime anyone's ever told you that they broke up, it's a good thing.
Mm.
Because all throughout human history, zero happy, good relationships have ended in a breakup or divorce. That's happened zero times. And I always think about that. Like, if the relationship ends, it's probably supposed to end. Now,
Yeah.
sometimes people can break up, learn some lessons, do some work on themselves, and then reunite. That's great. And I support them 100%. But I think that's more the exception rather than the rule. So I think breakup recovery, it isn't about getting your ex back. It's about getting yourself back. And that's really the point that I try to emphasize in that book.
Yeah, yeah, there is a way forward. Like it's normal that at some point you feel stuck. That
Yeah,
there are no options. You don't know what is the direction. You think you are among ruins, and you are in a sense. You are. It's
sure.
let's face it. But it doesn't mean that there is no new chapter. It might take some time to
Yes.
be built. It won't happen from one day to another. but it's there. Just it's not obvious. And most things in life are not obvious, especially those that matter and are meaningful and are long term. But maybe all you need, in my understanding, is getting some small gains. Let's say you are very depressed, and day after you manage to, I don't know, watch stand-up comedy on YouTube for 10 minutes and smile. That's already good. And then the day after you
Absolutely.
cook a meal. That's positive. And,
Yeah.
and that's how you start. That's how you start.
Little wins, absolutely little wins. And it's interesting. I mean, I think that going through a breakup, you're essentially experiencing a form of grief,
Mm.
right? So a lot of the literature on grief and like the actual, dealing with the death of a loved one, there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of lessons there for people going through a breakup because it's essentially a form of grief. And one of the constant lessons from, or constant themes, I should say, from the literature on recovering from grief is recovery is not going to be a straight line. There's going to be peaks and valleys, and you're going to have a good day, and then that's going to be followed by 2 days of maybe not so good, and then 3 days of good, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of wisdom there. But I mean, if anyone's looking for breakup advice, I would say, give yourself the time and space to heal. And so, I mean, I don't know how deeply you want to get into this, but I think a lot of people when they're going through a breakup, it's almost like you're coming off a drug addiction. Okay. So let's say it's like that person represented, let's call it heroin for you, right? Like the love and the sex and the validation, and those are very, very potent, potent things to work with, and they produce really potent reactions in us. And a lot of people going through a breakup, they still want their methadone. So in other words, they want to get the text, they want to like the person's stuff on Instagram, and they want to get the reassurance that way and all the rest. I'm of the opinion, of the belief that you really need to go cold turkey for a long time before you ever engage with that person again. And it
Mm.
isn't about trying to punish them or isn't trying to play games. It's about none of that. It's about trying to kind of detox your system, shall we say, from that relationship. Even if that person was absolutely incredible, you're trying to kind of, return to your baseline and avoid these emotional peaks and these emotional spikes and stuff. So I think the big mistake that a lot of people make going through a breakup is, oh, we want to stay friends, and
Yeah.
yeah, but I want to stay friends with this person. And often that's a genuine wish, and I get it 100%, but it's probably not serving you well long term. So I'm of the opinion that you really need to go cold turkey for a good long while if you ever want to engage with that person again. And again, it's not about playing games. It's coming back to getting yourself back, before you can be good with someone else.
Mm. Mm. So you compare the breakup to a grief, which I think is an excellent analogy. And I recall from one of your videos, I know you are now in Canada, so maybe I don't know if I can get too deep into this, but if you want to go this direction, just let me know, because it's about your family. So you are very much into Stoicism, and you
Yes.
think Stoicism is a great philosophy. I agree with that. I think most people who are into this personal development will also resonate with the message. But you once said that, yeah, you get a lot of learning from these wise thinkers from the past, but nothing was as powerful as the death of my mom, to
Yeah.
understand how life is short. And for me, it tells that you are grounded, that you are experiencing life and not just learning from books and preaching to others. So how do you deal with the finitude?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you, it's been this year. It'll be 7 years since my mom's death, and my mom and I were extremely close. I mean, she was my best friend,
Mm.
and grief is really, it's funny because it comes back to one of these things that we don't talk about very often. People don't have discussions about grief very often, and I would say, particularly in the Western world, the relationship with death is, when someone dies, we want to get them to the funeral home and put all kinds of makeup on them and make them look like, oh, they're just sleeping. And there's almost this subconscious attempt to deny the reality of death, to deny the finitude of death, as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, I mean, I lived in India for years. I studied Buddhism. I studied Stoicism. I studied at, with some great masters from those schools. And it's one thing to read all these lessons in a book or to read Marcus Aurelius and think you understand the nature of reality and all these things. But, you know, sometimes reality comes along and slaps you in the face and, helps you realize that you really didn't know anything before. So I think given my interests and given all the work that I'd done, if anyone was going to be positioned to deal with grief in a grounded way, it would have been me. But to be honest, I didn't. I mean, it was incredibly painful, and I was in denial for a long time when my mom died. So it was a valuable wake up call in terms of what really matters in life and what's really important. Probably the most impactful experience of my young life. And I mean, it's a cliche, but the overwhelming lesson from that experience is just, I mean, so much of the things we worry about is just absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
So little of it is going to matter at the end when we're on our deathbed, you know? And, you know, I think I still struggle with ego a bit. I'm a proud person, but going through that experience, it really helped me shed a lot of ego too. It's like, people don't like me, that's okay. You know, if people don't want to buy my book, that's okay. People think, you know, post mean comments on YouTube, that's okay. You know, it's like very, very, very little in life actually matters other than spending, you know, meaningful time with the people we love. That's really it. You know, we can write books, we can put our name on buildings, you could do the best podcasts in the world, like all this stuff. It's like so little of it actually matters. And that's been a very valuable lesson for me, and just kind of shedding a lot of the bullshit of life, if you'll don't mind my language. I mean, just letting go of the things that don't matter and paying more attention to the things that do. So yeah, it was an incredibly powerful and impactful experience for me. And I'm still grieving today, 7 years later. I mean, you still have these moments where just the finitude of that really hits you in a profound way, and sometimes a surprising way, because you think, well, 7 years, that's a long time, but sometimes it'll feel like yesterday. So for anyone out there experiencing grief, again, it's a bumpy road. You know, don't feel like you're not making progress if you have a bad day after a year of good ones. You know, it happens. It's a lengthy and sometimes a bumpy road.
What other lessons did you get from living in or spending some time in India, Indonesia, in the non-Western world? Because I know life is very different there. The values, the ideas of what matters, what doesn't, death, as you just mentioned, who we are, what are we here for. So what did you get as a Canadian living on the in the East, let's say in the East? What main lessons did you get?
Wow. Well, I think one is the presence of spirituality and spiritual rituals in daily life is totally different. I mean, the first time when I guess I was 19, I moved to India for a year, and that was my first time outside of North America. So I just thought I was diving in the deep end, right? And just one thing you see there is the presence of the very old and the very sacred interspersed with everyday life. Well, right now, I mean, it's similar. I spend a lot of the year in Bali, Indonesia, and you'll see people at 6 a.m. going to, you know, say prayers and taking offerings to the temple and all this stuff. It's like we're in this hyper modern world in many ways, at least the part of the island where I spend time in. But there's the presence of the sacred and, you know, reverence for one's ancestors and all that interspersed with everyday life, which is often quite moving and quite inspiring. And you know, in the Western world, there's a lot of talk about privilege nowadays. You know, people call it white privilege, male privilege, all the rest. Well, I think regardless of your feelings about that, if you go to a place like India with a Canadian passport, you know, from the middle class background and all the rest, and you experience some of the poverty that you see in a place like India, it can't help but change you and make you feel grateful for the accident of your birth, right? I mean, I think it's just an accident that I was born in Canada to, you know, middle class, good parents, because poverty like you can't imagine. I mean, I saw things in India that I'll never unsee. And that isn't to say that it's all bleak and depressing. Absolutely not. It's vibrant and it's alive and it's moving and it's frustrating and it's inspiring. And I think a place like India, it's just extremes, you know, extreme beauty, extreme disgust in some ways, and everything in between. But in terms of just the lessons of being a place like that, you know, another thing too is the importance of family, about how, you know, what you might want to call traditional family values and respect for one's parents, and, you know, the involvement of grandparents in the lives of children and stuff. I think that's actually really beautiful, and that's something that I'm going to strive to achieve in my own life, you know, with my current partner and all the rest. So yeah, that's some things that jump to mind when you ask that question. But it's tough because I kind of take it for granted. I mean, I've spent the majority of my adult life outside of Canada by this point, by a lot. So I think I've internalized a lot of that stuff just without even thinking about it.
Yeah. And is there anything you miss from the West? I always ask this when I meet Western living in India, in China or in Indonesia? Is there anything you miss, and is there anything you don't miss? Okay, let me put this question in two.
Yeah, well, the thing I don't miss is I think I mean, you live in Ireland. I've never been to Ireland. I've been to the UK. I have some
You're
sense of
welcome.
what it could be
Yeah.
like over there. Yeah, I'd love to. I like your beer, man, Irish beer. But all the culture wars in the West, I don't miss
Mm,
that at all. I mean, people talk to me about Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau and all the wokeism and all this
mm,
trans this and trans that and all. It seems like a lot of people in the West are very, very angry and at each other's throats a lot of the time. And where I spend most of my life, that just doesn't exist. And I don't miss that at all because I used to be an enormous news junkie. So I studied history and I'm still a voracious reader. And I used to spend a lot of time just watching the news and reading the news and all the rest. And actually, a big change for me in recent years is I do way, way, way less of that than I used to because so much of this stuff, it does, again, coming back to what really matters, right? Like, how much is this week's headlines going to matter to me in the long run? Is this going to benefit me in any way? Do I really need to know about this stupid culture war happening in California? Like, no, not really. So I think that's one good thing about being an expat and spending most of my life outside of the West is I can kind of pick and choose what I pay attention to, and all the culture war stuff.
mm.
It's really not in my world most of the time. Um, in terms of things I miss, I mean, I think that we take freedom of speech for granted in a lot of the West. A lot
Yeah.
of places I've been, a lot of places I spend time, you really need to watch what you say. You need to watch who you say it to. So I think that's a principle that I hold very sacred, and I think that we take it for granted in the West, and we should hold on to it. I mean, there's lots more. I mean, the traffic where I live is absolutely insane, and just driving on these Canadian roads, it's like paradise for me. It's like, wow, there's traffic lights and everybody obeys them, and this is incredible.
Yeah.
Things like that. Yeah, that's some things like that.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to that. I'm into those cultural wars, and it's public and it's part of the podcast. It's also referred in some of my books, but they are a consequence of my own conception of the road and how we should behave in the road. That's
Sure,
one thing I want to tell to people. Like,
it's
if I
personal for
stand,
you.
yeah, if I stand for certain things, it's because I think they so they will matter, but they will come my way. This is not thing
Yeah,
number one, not thing number two, not thing number three. Number three, you mentioned freedom of speech. I think I relate this to dignity, and I think dignity is a value that I want to have in my life. And if I want to
yes,
have it, I need to fight for freedom of speech. That's why I end up engaging in those things. But it's all down to the question to how can you have a life that has meaning and makes sense to you and will make sense when you are in your deathbed, and then you end up, let's say, being on that side of the cultural war because they will interfere with your own beliefs and how you can put them in practice, but they are secondary. And I truly believe that those who are um, obsessed with those things, they have more serious issues than what's happening there. I think, and I say that for people who are on that side and on the other. It's a distraction. It's what when Jordan Peterson says, yes, clean your room before you go out there and tell others how to live. He's not only telling that to people who are into this woke shite, he's also telling that to the others. He's telling that across the board. Like, solve your
hmm
own things first.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it sounds like you've found a healthy outlet and a productive outlet for your concerns about the culture and stuff. I guess for me, just I see some people in my life, some people I come in contact with, friends and some family, where it seems like the culture wars, it's like it's eating them up and they're
Yes.
wasting all kinds of energy just consuming mindlessly and getting angry about all these things rather than actually doing something about it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you mentioned Jordan Peterson, clean up your room. I always think of the line from a Buddhist teacher named Jack Cornfield. He has this great line. He says, "Tend to the part of the garden you can touch,"
Mm.
right? And it sounds like you're doing just that. So I respect that 100%. But yeah, I'm against people just wasting all kinds of time and energy focusing on it, and there's no real, like, they're not doing anything with it. Do you know what I mean? They're not actually. It's just a waste of
Yeah.
time. And it's actually hurting them sometimes
Yeah.
physically, like the stress and that. So I'm against that. If you're going to be following that stuff and it's going to be a part of your life, like, you should do something with that. Like some productive outlet.
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing I would say is add some humor. Add some humor to that.
Yes.
If
Oh,
you are taking
yes.
it too seriously, sorry, I don't have
Yes.
time. And I don't care if you believe in two genders or 150. If you don't have humor, I don't have time for you. That's
Yes.
that's simple. Like,
A
let's
hundred
face
percent.
what's happening with some light mood, because otherwise we just, as you said, we are just going to, we end up eating ourselves, and that's just ugly. We need to be there
Absolutely.
at the end of the day intact and be able to express ourselves and not just falling apart and not knowing who we are and what are we doing there. So have some humor, and that's in that sense. I think, like, where I live, the Irish are great with that. I believe some of the British as well. I think in Canada and some parts of the States as well. I think that you guys, native English speakers, are very good at adding some funny elements to the discussions. I think you can approach things in a way that is more grounded and pragmatic. Maybe it's not as good as it was in the past, but still there is some liberalism in the good sense that you guys maintain. I don't know if you see that when you travel, but there is something more down to earth among the native English speakers that I see on others.
Yeah, no, I mean, a sense of humor is absolutely essential. And I mean, I'm from a native English speaking country, so I don't have the perspective that you have, but I think we're pretty good at yeah, at seeing like dark humor and things and all the rest. But I'll tell you, I don't think we hold a candle to the Russians. I mean, my fiance is Russian, and we have a lot of Russian friends, and talk about just very good um, dark humor and being able to laugh at life when it's very when there it doesn't seem like there's a lot to laugh at. I think the Russians might be the best at that, at finding humor in unexpected places. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, actually, my girlfriend is Ukrainian, so
Oh, there
we
you
are
go.
almost we are almost on the same boat. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Like, they can surprise you with a sense of humor that you never heard of. You don't know exactly what are the terms and conditions of those jokes, but they are there. They are just not evident for us. Maybe we need some time to understand. Like, everything as well. Like, I spent some time living in Hungary and in Poland,
Hmm.
so I don't know, and so I got. In close contact with Eastern Europe. So for me, it's not as shocking as it is for others, but for sure, they are more funny than it seems. They are not as uh, black and white as we tend to describe them. Just, they are not obvious, and like everything else, it needs some interaction.
Right. Right.
It-
Right.
yeah, maybe it needs, going back to what we are talking about. Maybe it needs some motion and motion.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Either with a friend or without. Either way is fine.
Exactly, exactly. So, talking about that, you are not a big fan of the red pill, and I think you made it public now. So, can
uh,
I get your thoughts on the red pill? We don't need to name any person. I think they promote themselves very well, so
hmm.
there's no need to refer their names. But what are your thoughts on the red pill? Like,
Well, here's the thing. It's I don't want to throw the baby out with the proverbial bathwater. I mean, it's well the other it's the opposite end of the extreme that we were speaking about just a moment ago,
mm,
where there's guys putting women on a pedestal and kissing their ass and she can do no wrong and all that kind of thing, idolizing women. The red pill is kind of the extreme end of that.
mm,
And I don't know how you feel about this, but my kind of default setting for life is I think the extreme ends on any issue are usually wrong.
yeah,
Both extremes on any question are usually wrong. I try to be a little more nuanced in my thinking. And so, you know, I think there are some lessons in the red pill space that are valuable, for a lot of guys to hear. Things that maybe I would take for granted, maybe other men wouldn't, such as, women are human and they're going to make mistakes, and don't sacrifice yourself at the altar of a relationship. um, be a man, like, have a backbone, don't tolerate disrespect, learn how to set boundaries, um, believe what she does, not what she says. All these things that I would take for granted, for a lot of guys, that's like revolutionary for them. And so I respect that. I mean, some guys need to find that, and that can serve a purpose. And I'm on board with all of those messages, obviously. But the red pill seems to produce a lot of extremists, and it seems to attract, or maybe even produce, some guys who just really don't like women.
yeah,
And I don't think you can deny that in a lot of the corners of the red pill space, there's genuine misogyny there. guys who just seem like, and they seem to view, a lot of these guys seem to view women not as humans, but as these creatures, these devious, scheming, mysterious creatures who come from another planet, who just exist to, take half of your life in a divorce settlement, and who want to, cheat on you at every other, that kind of thing. And I don't relate to that at all. I love women, I don't think they're goddesses. I don't think that they're up here above me. Like, no, I think they're human. And I love women. I love polarity. I love the differences between men and women. And that's another point for the red pill that a lot of these guys talk about. Yes, men and women are very different. We respond to different attraction cues, and there's going to be different things that, different elements in a relationship depending on the man and women and all this stuff. Like, men and women are very different, but we're not like a different species. And that's where I think a lot of those red pill guys go too far. And honestly, I'm going to sound arrogant, and it's a superficial point, but it seems to me, and I'm not going to name names because I don't want the backlash, to be honest, but a lot of these red pill guys, I mean, just anyone with eyes, it's all posturing. Yeah. It's guys keeping their voice super low and standing up super stiff, and look how alpha I am, and I'm more alpha than you, and I'm the alphaest alpha, whoever alpha'd. I mean, just to my mind, it's so cringy, and it's like, I mean, I don't know. I just find that superficial aspect of it a big turnoff. I can't actually listen to what the guy's saying because I'm so conscious of how self-conscious he is. Do you know what I mean? I mean, what do you think?
No, I agree, like, with the vast majority of things you said. And also their friends are all like them. They don't need to be big. They don't need to be super wealthy. They don't need to drive the most expensive car. And if let's say if I'm driving a Fiat, then no, you're not welcome to the club. Then if you didn't go to the gym for the last 2 days, sorry, we don't open the door to you. If you are, I don't know, under 90 kilos, no, you're not welcome to the club. Well, there should be like a degree of exception. Like, I don't have anything. Actually, I go to the gym, and I know you two quite often. Yeah. We in the beginning of the podcast, we even mentioned the benefits of exercising. So it's all good. Making money, there's nothing bad about it. I would instigate everyone to put their financial life together, because even on psychological side of the house, it's very good. Driving, well, yes. I said this on the podcast the other day. I don't even put that driver's license myself. If you want to drive a car, it's fine. But you are not, I think in the end, they are very materialistic. And so, as you said, all about the appearance and not about who they are, So, yes. I don't know. I think they are good at diagnosing the problems, but maybe they are not as good when it comes to the prescription.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. But again, like, I'm of many minds on this topic, because some of these lessons, some of that wisdom, guys need to hear. Now, maybe I grew up in a house where a lot of this stuff was, common knowledge, but not every guy did. So yeah, I have complicated feelings about it, and at the same time, it just speaks to the dearth of what we might call real men, masculine leaders in our culture, right? I mean, it makes sense why. I mean, the Andrew Tate thing, you know who he is, I assume.
Yeah.
Like that phenomenon, like, it makes sense. Jordan Peterson, I mean, he's selling out arenas all over the world, telling men to get their acts together and clean up their room. And you might look at that and say, why on earth is that popular? But it makes total sense when you have a culture that doesn't celebrate masculinity and indeed vilifies masculinity all the time. Then of course there's going to be a backlash to that, and there's going to be a vacuum there of credible male leaders. And so a lot of the red pill guys, a lot of them are just opportunists. They see that vacuum and they think, I'm going to make a lot of money here, and I'm going to spew a lot of nonsense. And so I have complicated feelings about it. And again, not to say that all the guys in that space are the same. They're not. But I think where it gets into the stuff where it's like a lot of these guys just, I wouldn't want to go for a beer with them, because I can tell, like, they really don't like women, and it's like, what's better than women? Like, I don't relate to that personally.
For sure, women are better than them.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I think most people would agree with that. And
but again, it's like, sorry, but it's a nuanced point, because again, some guys will hear that, that I love women, and they'll think, oh, you're probably some beta kiss ass. It's like, no, man, like, not at all. Like, you can love women without liking them all the time. You can love women with while at the same time setting and establishing clear boundaries. You know what I mean? But all that seems to be lost in our culture. It's just the extremes that are that are gaining prominence. It's like, and guys don't realize, like, that's where the sweet spot is, where if you're a credible guy with your act together, who can set and maintain boundaries, who doesn't take any shit from women, but who also just loves the feminine, and has, you can have a good conversation, you can ask good questions, and people don't see that. It's like, that's the sweet spot, when you can, combine the best lessons from all sides, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Of course, you're probably going to end up a bit isolated because you are not really trying to be part of a tribe or connect to a specific group. So there is a price to that. But I think there's not only a price. There are also a lot of benefits. And I think you are what I would call a one-man media with what you do. Like you, of course, you have your own links and relations. So in terms of your ventures as author, speaker, coach, podcaster, like what are the beauties and the challenges of doing most of the things on your own, and what would be your advice for someone who is trying to do something similar?
For someone who's trying to be an independent author, or someone who's just doing YouTube, or could you be a little more specific?
Yeah, maybe both. Let's say someone wants to put their thoughts and ideas out there. They can they can write books, they can create a YouTube channel, they can do both. Basically, they want to start something with the things they know, and they want to share it with others. The methodology can vary depending on the individual, but they will do everything as a I don't like much the word, but as a solopreneur.
Yeah, well, be prepared for a lot of setbacks. Be prepared to work really, really, really hard. For years, no one's going to pay attention to you, and that's okay. Just keep working. But to be honest, the first thing that comes to mind is two sentences that I have. So I have this document where I have YouTube video ideas. Just I get an idea, I throw it in this document, and then I'll make a video about it. I just made a couple of videos earlier today. Two sentences that is kind of my philosophy at the top of the document. First sentence is tell the truth always. The second sentence is what would be valuable to my audience. I was on a coaching call recently with a guy who is much bigger YouTuber than me. And he was asking me for some advice, and he was saying, well, yeah, I don't know what I want to post, and I kind of want to post about this, but maybe I want to do this, and maybe I actually want to do this. And it was all I. And I stopped him. I said, why are we talking about you? It's not really about you. It's about your audience, right? How can you be useful to them? How can you be helpful to them? If you focus on the value that you can provide your audience, you will find an audience, and eventually you'll get good feedback, and you'll be productive, and eventually, you'll be rewarded for that. But I think it's tough because it's a tough market. I mean, there's a million YouTubers out there. It's very competitive. But I think if you want to do good in the world, just starting with that basic question of how can I be useful isn't a bad place to start. And I would also say, try to pick a niche. So, we're not all going to be Joe Rogan. Only Joe Rogan's going to be Joe Rogan, right? Pick a specific subject area or something relatively narrow that you could focus on, that you can really provide a ton of value. Stay consistent with that, and eventually you should find your audience. But just remember that without your audience, you have nothing. It all starts with them. And I think just always start with that question of how you can be valuable, how you can be useful.
Yeah, 100%. Or if you talk about yourself, you need to talk about yourself in a way that you sound tangible, that you are one of, you can be you can be part of the audience. You're not just talking back to that pedestal. You're just talking like among the audience. But it happened that you have a camera and a microphone, and you decided to put your words out there, and you want to share. And I think people really want to resonate with those that are expressing themselves on the internet or on books, because I think those old days, I think we're more or less same age, but those old days of the author, let's say, or the writer that was living far from the humanity, writing books at, I don't know, at 10 p.m. in the evening, and then trying to publish them, but he'll never be able to, and he'll get everything released after death. I think these days are kind of gone. Like now, more and more artists and creators have the appetite, to be public. It doesn't mean that they want to be famous or they want to be tapped in the back, but there is more and more an interest for contact with the audience, direct contact.
Absolutely, yes. And that's not to say that we all need to be posting incessantly about our personal lives on Instagram or something.
Yeah,
Absolutely not. And you might find that a certain channel, is better for you than others. Like personally, I like YouTube, but for someone
yeah,
else that might be Instagram or whatever. But you reminded me of something else, which is don't try to look or sound cool. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Because there's a lot of, like, talking about the red pill, there's a lot of guys and a lot of women like trying to look and sound cool, and you're not going to connect with people if that's what you're doing. If it's all posturing and you're worried about saying this and you're worried about that, there's a real liberation in just saying, oh, I'm just going to say what I think is true in the most effective way I can, and people are either going to like it or they're not. But at the very least, I don't think I'll be accused of being hypocritical or of being trying to, posturing or something. Just don't try to look cool, because if you're going to try to look cool, you're really not going to connect with people.
yeah, yeah. Well, 100%. So, like personally, on the podcast, I just share topics that I'm interested in. So I always
Yeah,
benefit from these conversations. I talk to you for an hour. It's now an hour. It seems like 10 minutes because time just flies, which is great. But I already gain. I don't know how many followers I'm gonna get out of this conversation. How many likes? I'm not going to say I don't care. Of course, I care. But I already have my win. This 1 hour was
yeah,
fantastic. No, I had a great time. I feel better after our chat. So whatever comes, it's an addition. And I think that's the way to approach these things. Not thinking, oh, I want to get it all in once. No, it won't happen like that. Just enjoy what you are doing, and
yeah.
the things that will be put on top, they are just an extra, and welcome that and make something out of it. But you have to enjoy and be yourself all the time. So that's why I bring people that I can relate to, and I'm nearly sure that I can have a good time talking to them, and our conversation will be of interest for others. And typically this equation makes sense. So that's how I would approach it. So, what are your
Absolutely.
plans? Is there anything you want to share that, or anything you have on the horizon? Anything new or anything developing?
Yeah, I for several years now I've been working on a project about sex
Mm,
for straight men in particular. So I'm very excited about that. It's an ongoing thing, but I've poured I don't know how much, how many hundreds of hours into this thing. So I'm excited to share it with the world at some point. But that's kind of the main thing I'm working on right now. I'm not going to share too much about it because it's still ongoing, but that's what's exciting me right now.
but
Because
is it a
again, I think
book
there's a lot
or
of,
what is it?
well, I think it's going to be a book and a video course for men, because I
Mm,
think, we're fed a lot of lies in our culture. And I think one of the lies we're fed is, I think that people aren't conscious of men's sexual potential. We think that only women can achieve multiple orgasms and only women can do all these things. And it's like there's an entire universe available to men if he just has his eyes open. So I'm pretty excited about that. That's kind of the main thing I'm working on right now. And of course, I still do YouTube, and I still do one-on-one coaching and all the rest.
yeah, and you do it very well. I want to say.
Oh, thank you.
Uh, I want to say what I said on the beginning. I hope people are still listening to us after an hour. If not, they're going to listen for the second time. But I don't mind because I think this needs to be said over and over again. I think your work is of huge help for people because you name problems, and I think there's no better beginning than knowing what's going on. At least
Mm,
give a name and a face. Like that idea that at least you can identify the monster and not only knowing that there is something threatening out there. I think it helps a lot. Okay, I know there's an issue. I can call it X, Y, Z, and it has this shape and form. So I think that's a
mm.
great beginning. So if people listen to your stuff, and probably they can also sign up for the course. I think they can live in a way in a much more harmony than they are right now. So I highly recommend your stuff, and I hope people will pursue your advice because it's really like night and day.
I'm really glad to hear that, Vitor. And yeah, I really enjoyed talking with you today, and I'm really glad that you found my stuff helpful. It's never gets old hearing that.
Yeah. So look, thanks very much for the chat. Was a fantastic pleasure. I hope we have the chance to catch up for maybe after your new work on sex for straight men. I think there's a lot to talk about it. So
Yeah,
yeah,
great. Thanks very much,
cool.
Vitor. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Zach. Okay, have a good evening. Take care.
You too. Thank you.